Welcome to the English Homemaker podcast, a podcast where we discuss all things home, a realistic but fresh view of homemaking from the suburbs of the south of England. I'm your host, Alissa Evelyn. Welcome to episode 6 of the English Homemaker. Hello, lovely listener. I hope you're having a really great day. Today is a funny kind of a day, as was yesterday morning. It's been cloudy and grey here for about just over a week, I think. And today we're having some really heavy rain, which I'm very happy about. I'm not happy when it's grey and cloudy and does like occasional little like drizzles of rain, because that's not super helpful to my garden. But a really like proper downpour will fill my water butts up. It will water all the plants nice and deeply at the roots, and the allotment will be happy as well. And so that makes me really happy. When it's just grey and cloudy, oh, it just makes me a bit sad. I'd rather have the sunshine out. And I am missing the sunshine, as I mentioned in previous episodes. I have really got used to being in the sunshine, so I am really missing being out in it. And any second that I can be out in it, I'm trying to, although life is so distracting and there's so many things to get done inside the house that, oh, it's so difficult sometimes to remember to go outside, especially when for the last week we've had just tiny moments and opportunities of sunshine, and it doesn't necessarily coordinate with the plans I have for the day. Anyway, it's a good way of starting a podcast that's called The English Homemaker, just talking about the weather, isn't it? I suppose. But the weather does guide our lives here in the UK quite a lot, because it is so changeable and it's just not predictable. People try and predict the weather. I have 2 different weather apps on my phone, and quite often they conflict with what they think is going to happen that day. One of them is often more right than the other, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. And often what they actually say is going to happen doesn't happen, and it's either more mild. It's usually more mild than they recommend. So, and also it's usually hotter than they say. When it's going to be a warm day, it's usually way hotter than they suggest. Anyway, so there we go. A little bit of an English rant about the weather for those of you not in England. And for those of you that are, you've probably already had this same rant somewhere in the last week. The other reason it's been a kind of funny kind of a week is that yesterday, Monday morning, I exploded the porridge in the microwave and simultaneously found that my husband had put his glass jar of dry muesli in the fridge door. Now, I called my husband immediately to check he was okay on his way to work. He's just been so tired lately. We both have. I don't think either of us are hugely suited to sleeping when the weather is this changeable. And it can be humid one night and warm and cold the next. And it's just quite difficult to then feel like cozy in bed in the right temperature. And therefore, we haven't slept as well as we ought. And I'm guessing that's the same for quite a lot of people all around the world. So my greatest sympathies to those of you out there who are struggling with sleep at the minute. We understand. And especially if you have young children as well. My children actually have been really good for the last about 3 nights. But prior to that, with the sunshine, their bedrooms are on the side of the house where the sun actually goes down. This incredibly modern house that was not built correctly for the sunshine means that their bedrooms are the hottest rooms in the house as they're going to sleep. And also the brightest. So although we have really good blackout blinds and curtains, and so that the light necessarily isn't a problem, their rooms can get up to about 28 degrees at night. And of course, it's England. There's no air conditioning. So actually they sleep fine, but they tend to go to bed a bit later. So they are more tired overall. Now, the last few nights, thankfully, because of the rain and the dullness of the sky, they've actually gone to bed at a reasonable time, about 7:30, not 8:30. So I am kind of counting my lucky stars, I suppose, whilst simultaneously hoping and praying this is something that's here to stay, because that extra hour means so much to me. It means that I can get all the things I need to do for the following day done a whole hour earlier than I was able to a week ago. And it's just wonderful. It means that maybe when my husband next says, oh, should we play a board game now? Instead of feeling far too tired because it's already far too late for me, that I'll be like, oh, yeah, okay. And we can actually have a proper date with some actual energy behind it. Now, I was going to take a moment then to apologise for speaking for about 5 minutes, all about weather and sleep, but realising that for the majority of us, those two things are huge reasons why our daily lives are different every single day, why sometimes we struggle, why sometimes we have a good day. It can all come down to whether it's sunny or rainy, snowy, or like, I don't know, super windy, or whether we actually slept properly or not, whether we feel restored, whether we feel full of energy in life, or whether we're just kind of like our eyes are open, but we're not hugely present. And I know all of those feelings. And I think that's part of the beauty of life, part of the drama of life. And I think it's what makes it really fun. It's certainly what makes it really fun about being in the UK, because the weather is so changeable. Anyhow, we have had actually a really good few days. We've had a lovely visit at the allotment at the weekend where we spent a good couple of hours all together as a family. The kids actually played really nicely for the majority of the time. They even sat by someone's shed in the shade for a little while, just chatting with each other and pulling grass stems, and it was just beautiful to see. We met quite a lot of other allotment holders there. It is such a friendly place to be. We got given some free garlic and cavolo nero and iceberg lettuce, and just we shared names and we talked about jobs and where we live, and just it's just such a friendly place, and it's a lovely part of the local community. So if you're someone that likes gardening and you've not thought about an allotment, give it a little thought. It's a lovely way to meet people. We also got given, or the kids got given, which was very sweet, some little seedlings that someone had left over, and so the kids planted those up. My husband Pete, he put some horse manure, which is free, on the plot. He just sort of shoveled it on some of the beds. And then we found on the plot some kind of like black tarp, which we kind of spread across some areas just to stop the weeds coming up. So we managed to do loads of things for free because there was a bunch of stuff on site. And the seedlings that we got given were like calabrese, cauliflower and cabbage. And we had on the plot some big blue kind of semicircle ring things that we could put some netting over to protect it from bugs. So super happy, chuffed. It felt like a really productive time at the plot this time, which was really wonderful. It doesn't always feel that way. The few times that we went before, it just felt like we were just pulling weeds and grass, and it didn't look hugely different, and it didn't look like we moved further on, and this time felt really positive. We've seen our fair share of wildlife in the last 48 hours as well. There was a little mouse living somewhere in the compost bin that's been at the allotment for I don't know how long, and a huge ant's nest at the bottom of it. So we gave it a really good soaking. We found the ant's nest first, and my husband did, as he was trying to get some of the good compost out the bottom. And he was like, there are just so many ants in here. I said, just spread it anyway, because they'll just move themselves around and make a new house somewhere else. And we'll absolutely soak the bin, and hopefully that will disperse them, because they don't want to be somewhere wet. They want to be somewhere really dry, which is why they've enjoyed that bin, because no one's been using it for a while. But when we soaked it, a little mouse came up to the top, who'd clearly also been living in there. And then the time before that, when I went up myself to take some compost to the plot, I saw a proper fox just standing in one of the lanes, and he stared at me and I stared back at him, and then he scarpered off. And if that wasn't Beatrix Potter enough, that little mouse coming to the top of the compost bin and getting all the water out of its ears, or that fox staring at me in the eyes, this morning my husband told me and showed me a video of a deer on our front lawn, which isn't like the first time we thought that's happened, but it's the first time we've seen it, because we haven't had a camera out the front until very recently, until I think last December. And so it was just really fun to see. We'd known there was a deer because there were some deer droppings on the front lawn once last year, and probably about the same time. We do live fairly close to some big woodlands, as well as just some little like patches of woods where they could be dwelling. But it's just so cute and fun to see that 4:00 in the middle of the morning, this morning, there was a deer right on our front lawn, and it hooned off as soon as it saw somebody get in a car across the road at 4:00. So it's just cute, and it hung out for like 15 minutes. I think it's pretty cool to have some good positive stories of interactions with the natural world during the summer months, because it's not just another bite or a sting or something like that. So I feel very happy about those stories, and I hope they cheered you up. And then finally, yesterday, I was threatening to do this last week in the podcast and I knew it was coming soon. I finally made jam with the Tayberries. We got overall 1.5 kilos of berries, which I froze, and then took them all out yesterday morning, shoved them in my big jam pan, and put in about 800 grams of sugar once they had thawed out, and boiled up for about 20 minutes, put them in jars that I had sterilised in the oven, and bing bang bosh, I had 6 jars and a little bit of Tayberry jam. And we're really excited to use that. I think I'm actually going to call it Summer Treasure Jam because it's not wholly Tayberries. There's like a few tiny little treasures of what is known in Sweden as smultron, little wild strawberries that grow in my garden. So those are a few of those are in there. And perhaps that name is a bit too cutesy, but I think the kids will love it. And as the jam is really something that we have every morning as a family, I think they'll just love going out to get Summer Treasure Jam. I think that'll make it even more special for them. The other thing that has happened today is that I've already been to the shops and I went today with cash. Now, we have our kind of month end happens a week later than the actual month. And so I'm just trying to be extra cautious about our spending. And so I took cash to the supermarket today to get what we would need for the next few days. And I just thought I'd share with you that process, especially for those of you that are on a tight budget and who wanted to know how I went about doing that. So I just went and made a meal plan for the next few days that was pretty concise, that took into account a little snack for everybody, that took into account dinners, lunches. I'll be taking things out of the freezer that I've made in the past, so like probably just some soup and maybe I'll have some eggs with it, something very, very simple and very cheap. And then the dinners, I went through and figured those out, what I could make for the next few days. And then I wrote a really, really concise list. I was going to do an order like I normally do, and then just realised that it would just be expensive, just really expensive, because I always end up throwing so many extra things in one of those orders. So I went with a very specific list, told myself I won't deviate, and it is written on the back of a brown envelope. And I bought, shall I tell you, I bought 1 aubergine and 1 courgette, some potatoes. They didn't have the cheaper potatoes like I would normally get, like just regular white potatoes. So I bought some Maris Piper potatoes, so fancy. I bought some carrots. I always buy them organic. There were some things I felt like I was happy to buy slightly lower quality of this week in order to make budget. And then there are certain things I just cannot break with. So organic carrots are one. I feel like if you've had an organic carrot versus a regular carrot, and or you eat your carrots raw, it's just like there's no comparison between the two. I've got a little jar of sour cream. I got some organic butter. I got 3 litres of Jersey milk, a tiny little pot of organic yogurt so I can make my yogurt. And then I got a tin of chickpeas. I got about, how many eggs? 21 eggs. I got a kilo of onions, just regular white onions. I got some phyllo pastry. I got a tiny little mini pot of baked beans. And I was going to get cooking apples, and then I put it on the scale and weighed it, and it wanted to charge me like £2.50 for 5 English Bramley cooking apples. So I thought, no, I'm not paying £2.50 for Bramley apples. That seems crazy. So I put them back and I looked to see what other English apples I could buy. And I could buy a bag of 4 big apples, I think Gala ones, for 85p. So I picked those up instead. And I feel like sometimes going to the supermarket pays off, because if I'd have done that online order, I probably would have just got the Bramley apples and thought that it was going to be a good deal, because quite often it is in the winter months. But clearly in the summer, it's, that was not a good deal. I got some bananas, just about 7 or 8 bananas. I was going to get a whole chicken, but they actually didn't have any of the whole chickens I would normally get. And they only had some very sad little looking chickens. So I got some free range, skin on, bone in, drumsticks and thighs, because that's actually a pretty good price. And then I got some mixed peppers, some large tomatoes, about 800 grams. And then I got 4 baking potatoes. I got bacon. We always buy the naked bacon, which is nitrate free. And that is something I will definitely not compromise on. And then I got 6 little cartons of pure apple juice. And then I suppose it would be helpful if you knew what I was going to make with all of that. So I got given some Cavolo Nero from the allotment, but I also picked up some local Swiss chard the other day. So I thought I'd make like a greens pie, like a phyllo greens pie. I've got a little bit of leftover feta, I've got some cheddar cheese, and obviously I've got the eggs. So I shall mix that all up together, put it in the phyllo pastry with some butter, pop it in the oven, and that would be absolutely delicious with some hummus. The kids love that. I call it cheese pie, but it's really greens pie. It's a great way of getting a load of greens in. So that will be dinner tonight probably. And then I've written on the list apple pancakes for breakfast tomorrow. I like to do kind of slightly more exciting breakfasts on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. Tuesdays and Thursdays need to be quick because we get out the door a bit earlier. Then tomorrow evening as well, we're going to have that chicken all roasted up with some cinnamon and some rice, and that'll be delicious. I think we've got a few other veggies we can have with it. I always have veggies in the freezer like green beans and peas, and then those, if I don't have anything fresh, then those will go along the side. Then on Thursday evening, I will be having homemade baked beans. I'm going to make some stock, and if it doesn't make enough stock, I will use some stock from the freezer to make some homemade baked beans with that bacon and have it with jacket potatoes and cheese. The other thing I'm going to make on Thursday is a nice big fat phare breton, which I've spoken about in I think it was like the second episode I ever made about food. We love phare breton. I'm actually going to try a different recipe. I've got Mimi Torreson's, is it French Country Cooking, I think is what it's called. And there's a recipe for phare breton in there. So I thought I would deviate a little bit and try that out. And I'll make that with some Jersey milk. And then on Friday, I am going to make, actually that's not for Friday, I'm going to make that tonight. I'm making caponata, which is a lovely recipe I had in a blog post recently. Not my blog, someone else's blog. So I'm going to make some caponata and have it with some anchovies and some hummus. So that's going with the greens pie tonight. And that's what we're going to have for basically the rest of the week. And then there's some potatoes and there's so many things in the cupboards that I could pull out for Friday night if I don't want to cook then either. Then there's still plenty of food left over. So I'm quite happy and excited about that. But tell you what, when I was sat there last night, it probably took me a good half an hour to think of even some vague recipe ideas, like just flipping through various different cookbooks, and then to really narrow it down and work out exactly what on which night and then exactly which ingredients took another half an hour. But it was really worth it because it meant today it was a very, very quick shop experience and I knew exactly what I needed and I'd really thought through all of the detail. So hopefully by the end of the week I'll still feel very positive about the things we've eaten and how I've cooked and what I've prepared. Okay, just one more update before we move on to the meat of this episode, and I hope you like the first bits of these episodes. I really wanted to make sure I included stories from my life, things that have been going on, the trials, the struggles, the solutions, just the funny things and the sad things that go on in my life. And I really wanted to share those with you. And although I continue to share those in the second half of the episodes, usually, that I just wanted there to be a place where I just updated you. So I hope you find that quite fun. So the last thing I'm going to share with you today is I have started a brown rice sourdough starter, which is kind of cool. So far it seems to be going okay. I'm only on day 2. It does seem like already there might be some life in there. Whether it's good life yet or not, I don't know. But it smells okay so far. It looks okay. So that's very exciting. I have been keeping a sourdough starter alive for about 3 years now. I was one of those people that was very affected during COVID from the lack of yeast and inspired to start my own sourdough, and I have been keeping it. I used the Shay Elliott dry starter method. She's got a fantastic video all about how to do that. So if you're a bit nervous about what to do and how to do an actual sourdough starter, I would definitely recommend that one. It is still alive and sat in my fridge. Sometimes it stays there for a very long time before I use it and it's still okay. And it's very, very happy. And I love to make things like cinnamon buns and bagels and baguettes as well as just regular loaves. And obviously I love my sourdough Dutch baby. So as I've been gluten-free for a couple of months just to heal some gut issues I was having, which does seem to be working, then I just figured that I would like to have some gluten-free sourdough as well, because a lot of the gluten-free rolls and loaves and toast and things that you can get at the supermarket is so full of additives to keep it on the shelves and just extra ingredients that don't need to be there. So I'm very excited to try and make a healthier loaf at home. I don't know if it won't be cheaper, it'll probably be a bit more expensive, but it won't be as expensive as some of the loaves that you can get on the internet, which I have got that are beautiful gluten-free sourdough loaves, but they're just so expensive. So it has to be cheaper to make it myself and better for me, and probably nicer, I'm guessing. So I will keep you posted. It will probably take me a little while before I have a loaf that is any good. And there's so many different recipes out there for me to try. I find a lot of these things, it's worth trying a few different recipes until you settle on one that you like, that the ingredients are easy to source for you, and there's just not too many ingredients. I would like to try and avoid using xanthan gum or some kind of bread mix and kind of make my own. I want to make sure it's foods on ingredients that I know that my body and like a human body will actually digest properly and get some kind of nutrition out of it. So we will see. I'm very excited about it, and like I said, so far it does seem like maybe there's already some life in the pot. So let's move on to what this episode is all about, and that is the politics of being a homemaker in England, UK, versus other countries and other parts of the world. And it's something that I'm quite passionate about, something that I do think about, something that gets me pretty riled up and angry, and something that really excites me and fills me with great joy. It's a lot of the reason that I started this podcast, was to make me realise the positive things about being a homemaker in England, to make me feel less alone in doing so, and also to give huge amounts of encouragement to anybody listening, wherever you're homemaking in the world, that there are positives and negatives wherever you are, and that it's the heart behind what you're doing that matters the most. So, as the excellent podcaster that I am, I did a little bit of research and got a few numbers for you. I am a bit of a statistics geek. I did do a separate statistics, like GCSE. I am that much of a geek. So, but I'm proud of it. So I did look up just some of the like employment statistics. I just wanted to know how many people out there are homemakers, even if they don't call themselves that, I guess, and just see what information I could garner. Anyway, so the information that I did find, obviously there aren't any homemaker statistics because that's not really a word that we use in the UK. But I did find out that 75% of women are employed in the UK versus 79% of men. And in 1971, that statistic was about just above 50%. So it's gone up from just above 50% in 1971 to 75%. Now, in other countries, we've got Italy is about 60% of women are employed. France is about 68%. The US is 71%. Sweden is 77%. And the Netherlands is about 82% of women employed. And where we live in the country here in the southwest is the highest level of employment in the whole country. So that statistic is a bit skewed in the upwards direction around where we live. There was a little bit of a survey of the people that were economically, or the women that were economically inactive in December 2022. And it was estimated that about 1.47 million women were economically inactive because they were looking after their family and home. And that's versus about 200,000 men. So that's quite a big difference. The thing is, when you say like 1.47 million people are looking after their family and home, it sounds like quite a lot. But when you consider that like 75% of women are employed, you've also got to think of the people that are permanently like sick in the country. You've got to think of people that are retired. You've got to think of people that are students. All those count towards the statistics as well. So it really is a very small percentage of women in the UK are looking after their family and home full time. And the other statistic that kind of surprised me that it was, set in stone, actually a fact, was that both parents it's more normal for them to work both full-time rather than one part-time and one full-time. It's really super normal for both parents to work full-time. Then I found another website with some other stats. There was 73.9% of couple families, so that's any kind of couple families, not just married, not, just people that are together in the same house with children, had both parents in employment. That 22.6% had one parent in employment, and 1 in 9 of those are dads. So that's an interesting stat. And then in the US, I tried to find some similar stats, but the stats seem to be a bit more complicated, probably just because there's a lot more people to sift through and a lot more bureaucracy. But it seems about 63.3%, so almost a whole 10% difference of couple families had both parents in employment, and about then another 10 in the opposite way, about 34% had just one parent in employment. I think that's interesting. I think quite a lot of that is based on just married couple statistics. So it'll be interesting to know a more overall picture. But it's definitely skewed in the way of fewer double parents in employment. I guess it will vary very differently on what state you're in and whether you're in the city or the country. And it's just so much more variable in the States. One of the main reasons I wanted to start this podcast was the anger and frustration that I felt being a homemaker in the UK with the limitations that we have, and the fact that I was really struggling to see it being a positive thing, taken positively, and something that ought to be celebrated that just hasn't been celebrated. It's something I wanted to explore and learn more about why we think the way that we think, why culture set up the way that it is, and whether it was possible or is possible to change the culture to be something where more homemakers could thrive and exist and feel happy and be celebrated, not just by the people in their home, but by their extended family, by their friends, by the community around them. I find being a homemaker in England something that you want to be a bit hush-hush about. It's not something that's widely talked of. It's something almost to be embarrassed about, or ashamed of. It's not something you want to shout out from the rooftops, and it's not something people talk about much. It's a funny kind of thing. People want to define you by what you do, and so when I speak to people in conversation over the last however many years that would have been, 7 years since I've been a homemaker, people ask me what I do for a living. And for a very long time, I used to give them my old job title. And still to this day, people want to know, oh, what did you do before having kids? What was your last job? And I don't want to be like one of those really super funny political people where I'm like, no, and have like a real rant about it. So I usually just give them the short answer and then get on. But I wish that homemaking had such value that people didn't feel the need to ask what I did before. You know what I mean? I think I've always thought my whole life being put in a box. Like I've always really, really not wanted to be in any kind of a box. So anyone wanting to try and put me in a box, I just feel kind of sad. But I do understand it as a social kind of construct, wanting to know, I guess kind of what your previous earning potential was, whether they should be scared of you. Also, maybe it's food for conversation. I don't know. They just want to know what kind of person you are by what you used to do. And I find that, I don't know, I kind of find that a bit sad. So I am much better these days at saying I'm a homemaker. But the funny thing is, when you say that, there's nothing else that happens in the conversation. They don't know what to do. It's kind of like this kind of roadblock, and then they have to sort of start the next bit of conversation from scratch because they don't know what to say. They just assume they know what that means, and that's it. They get on with it. There's nothing more for them to say. I don't think even once I've had that's good for you, or that's, it's nice that you get to look after your family, or I think a lot of people assume also that means I'm lazy, I don't do anything, or it just means I do laundry all day and clean. My house must be impeccably clean. I guess that's probably the most cliche thing when you say you're a homemaker, is people think that must mean you're a clean freak and your house is like impossibly clean and people don't want to come to it, which is far from the truth. I think the other assumption that I get is a kind of judgment of, oh, that must be nice for you, if only I could afford to do so. And I want to go very carefully here. Now, we do not come from any money. We've never had any handouts necessarily. Like, no one paid for our deposit for our house. We've never been given a car. Like, we've both had to work very hard for what we've got, and my husband works his bottom off. He works so hard every day for our family, and I'm so grateful for him. I am so grateful that he sees the value in what I do as a homemaker, cleaning the house and looking after the children and feeding us all and making sure we sleep in clean sheets and all of the other many things that I do around the home. He really values that, and I'm so grateful that I married a man who agrees with that, because that's not everybody's understanding of the way the world works. And so it's a good thing that we're on the same page. But also, realistically, when we got pregnant and moved to Belgium, the cost of me keeping my job was kind of higher than not having one. I don't think that made any sense. But basically, I would almost have to pay to keep my career for a few years whilst I had kids. Now, it's not the same over the whole world. It would probably be about half my salary or a third of my salary if I had kept at my career now to have my children in childcare. Childcare costs are variable across the world, but yeah, here in England we pay a lot of money. It's about £800 a month for full-time childcare in my part of the world. Now, it'll be different across the world. It'll be very different in London, I suspect, and it will be different if you need part-time childcare, etc., etc. But for full-time childcare, it's about £800 a month, which is a lot of money. It was not a consideration of ours when we chose to not end my career, but pause my career with the potential to keep going. I think because like being a housewife or a homemaker was something so frowned upon that no one in my family was like proud to do or even did, that it was something that I never made the decision to do. It was something I kind of fell into doing and then had to very much find my own way of doing it. It's taken me a very long time to embrace being a homemaker, be proud of being a homemaker, to actually take it seriously and call it my job and find a way of doing it that was really fulfilling to me, that actually worked for everyone in the family. And as you know from listening to other episodes of this podcast, I've only just got a handle on having a bit of a cleaning routine. It's not something I was ever taught. It's not something that ever came naturally. My mum has always worked. She still does. My grandmothers both worked, albeit my maternal grandmother, actually, she worked, like put her career very like as a very high priority in her life. She was a head midwife at the local hospital, and just like career was a very important thing to the family. And I think there's a responsibility that comes along with having an education as well. I mean, that's a whole other subject, but I was well educated, I've got a degree, and there's a responsibility and a weight of having that level of education that you feel like you don't want to waste your degree. You don't want to waste all that education. You don't want to waste all of that time that you spent learning all those things. And it's that can be a really very, very difficult decision for people. And I still feel like that's the decision I make every day. But certainly taking my job as a homemaker more seriously has enabled some of those old parts of my brain to feel quite happy, like they're being used again. One quote that I was reading in an article yesterday said, "To be a full-time homemaker is not an inferior choice, it is a personal decision." And I really think that's a brilliant quote. It's so 100% true. It's not for everybody, and it's no worse than or better than anybody. And it's just a really personal decision. And there are so many factors that come into play. Back in 2021, I wrote a blog post called Why I Call Myself a Homemaker. And it was the beginning of me re-establishing my role at home in a positive way. I think there's been a lot of chat about stay-at-home mums, or SAHM, SARMs, for ages. And I just felt like that's got this real negative energy behind that phrase. It carries a lot of like frustration and that kind of messy bun, getting it done kind of thing, and just looking really like you've never slept, and just being really grumpy, I think, about a lot of things, and moaning. Especially in England, we're very good at moaning and being grumpy. But I really wanted to change my title and establish myself in a new way. So I called myself a homemaker, and I put a lot of intention to what I was doing. That also happened to be about the time where we decided that I wasn't going back to work for the foreseeable future. That it was on the horizon, but I needed to stop thinking about, should I go back to work? Should I go back to work? And just make a decision on it. And that was a really, really hard decision. It's not an easy one to stop your career at any point, because it means that going back into a career at any point is harder. You're on the back foot. Your career progression is limited. It means that maybe even things like medical insurance or pensions are limited. It restricts your earning potential as well, the more time out you have from what you do. Now, the thing that gets me the most grumpy overall is the fact that full-time homemaking and actually looking after your children is not an option, not a financial option for the majority of people that I know. And that makes me both very angry and very sad. And it's a very complicated reason why. I mean, it's lovely that feminism has made it so that we can have a job, but it's very frustrating that feminism has kind of made it, or the patriarchy has then made it so that women have to have a job in order for people to afford food and transport and housing. And the way that our culture is set up kind of demands that both parents work. And that's just, it's very sad, and it makes me really angry. One of the big factors in considering whether I go back to work or stay at home full time was whether or not I'm just like letting my sisters down. The ones that are working full time, they work so hard and they're still balancing everything at home, or they're trying to. And I see how hard they work. I see how stressed they are. And it really is a major privilege that I'm able to be at home. I'm able to look after things, and I'm not struggling to balance everything in that same way. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm really, really grateful for that. I was thinking through all the different ladies that I know, because it is predominantly ladies I know that are homemakers. I was thinking through their circumstances. There's been a few people that I know lately who've been able to be home full time with their children, or just at home full time. And it's really interesting to figure out the reasons why and how they've been able to manage it. And lots of them have worked very, very hard for a long time and in order to be able to afford to do that. I think that's part of the reason people are having babies a bit later on, so that they've kind of got some money under their belt, have been able to afford to put their foot on the property ladder, etc., etc. But quite a lot of the time it's that the husband's kind of reached a kind of area in his career where he's earning enough to cover their expenses, basically. That seems to be the overriding factor. There's a couple of people I know that are forced to stay home because of some kind of disability, and some people's earning potential wouldn't cover their childcare costs. So there's a variety of reasons why people become homemakers, but the majority that I know simply is that one partner's income is enough to cover the costs of the household. There's a few other reasons I think people are kind of put off becoming a full-time homemaker, and even a part-time homemaker. I think people are worried they're going to get bored. I think some really super organized people actually manage to balance part-time or full-time work and all the things at home. And I am in absolute awe of that. There's a level of organization and intention that I just have not yet succeeded at. And I think those people probably would be bored at home if everything's already organized. You don't need more hours in your day, do you? But yes, I think boredom is something that people are really worried about. I was never worried about boredom. I am such a creative person, and I love like just crafts, and I love to cook. And so the more time I had for cooking, the more time I had for creative handmade home like crafts and things, I just was super excited to get on those and do things properly in a way that I'd never learned. And I feel like because I had to learn it, it just has taken me so much more time. I think another thing that people genuinely get very concerned about is that they don't want to be reliant on another person. That's a really, really big deal. If you have had experience of divorce in the past that's not positive, or you're even aware of the statistic of 50% of marriage ending in divorce, it could make you really wary of relying on another person's income. And a lot of people want to keep their money. A lot of people have separate accounts. Some people have joint accounts. And I don't know, the world wants us to be independent so badly, and that to trust somebody in that way to look after you is a challenge for a lot of people. And I understand that. We're a very, very self-reliant society, and yeah, to be dependent on other people and trust them in that way is a big, 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 big deal. Because if we were to become a homemaker, and this has happened to some people I know, if you become a homemaker, you have years at home and you've put your energy into that, and then divorce happens, that then you're left in a bit of a pickle. And I can see if you don't have a family and support network around you to catch you if that falls, then that is a significant problem. So I understand that. There's also a religious side of homemaking that swings in the other direction. That's not like you're forced to be a homemaker, but almost like if everyone around you is a homemaker, then you would maybe feel bad in the opposite direction from everything I've said. Hopefully that makes sense to some of you, but I think people do choose homemaking for religious reasons, that you may consider that it's your calling to be at home with your children in some way. And I really respect that. But also, I guess you could be caught in a trap of feeling like that's what you had to do, even if that's not what you wanted to do. And perhaps your calling is to do something outside of that and use other skills that you have that are very unique. So going back to being and choosing to be a full-time homemaker is not an inferior choice. It's a personal decision that you need to make for yourself, with your partner, with your family. And it can be very, very positive for lots of people, and could be something that you work towards. If it's not a financial possibility at the moment, maybe it's something you can sit down and go through your budget, work out if it's a possibility in another way, or you could do some evening work, or you could start your own business in some way in order to help you fund it. I know certainly there's a tribe of ladies on the internet who run homesteads and run so many side hustles to make extra money to make their life at home work. So yeah, I'm in awe of those ladies who somehow are managing to wangle like several businesses, as well as like homeschooling their children and making everyone epic food from scratch. Just in awe. There's so many people I just really respect how hard they work, and I hope that's coming across. There's just so many different ways of homemaking working for families, and I know quite a lot of families where the jobs are split equally, and it's not one homemaker and the other one working their socks off. That is split in between, so both of them keep their careers. One works half the week, the other works half the week, or some kind of balance thereof, and then there's always one of them at home to look after the home and the family. And I think that's a really lovely, lovely way of doing it. But I think it depends on your personalities. It depends on what kind of roles you've been given in society. And I think there are some really like naturally born hunter-gatherer men who really want to provide for the family 100%, would love their wives to stay home or partners. And there are women who desperately want to be home with their children. But then there is the total opposite. So it just it kind of depends how you've been brought up, what society you've been brought up in. I mean, there are definitely female-led societies all around the world. There's so many different ways of looking at it. And if I were to encourage you and I in something today, it would be to like shake it up, think of it top to tail, try and think of it in a different way and be okay with where you're at. And if you're not, just being honest with yourself and being honest with your family and your partner about how you're feeling about things. I think the more honest conversations we can have, the more raw conversations that we can have about how we feel about these things, the better. One of the other reasons I want to call myself a homemaker was because I just didn't like being defined by my role as a wife, and I really didn't want to be defined as my role, like by my role as a mother, because quite frankly, like I fail really well at being a mother and a wife all the time. Like it's an impossible thing to be perfect at those things. Your kids will disappoint you, your husband will disappoint you, and then you'll feel like somehow you're responsible, or it's just that can't be your full-time role. But homemaking can be. It's something that you can control. You can do the dishes at the same time. You can make sure things are well kept. You can have organizational systems that do what you tell them, and you can succeed at that. And I really appreciate that about it as a title. One of the books that has really sparked my brain on this whole topic is Radical Homemakers by Shannon. This book has made me feel very seen, but it's also made me so angry. And I wanted to share a little bit from the book because this particular part just made me like, oh, okay, this is interesting. So she is referencing a book called The Feminine Mystique, written in 1963 by Betty Friedan. And she is talking about housewife syndrome. It says, where American girls grew up fantasizing about finding their husbands, buying their dream homes and dream appliances, popping out babies and living happily ever after. In truth, pointed out Friedan, happily ever after never came. Countless women suffered from depression and nervous breakdowns as they faced the endless, meaningless tasks of shopping and driving children hither and yon. They never had opportunities to fulfill their highest potential, to challenge themselves, to feel as though they were truly contributing to society beyond wielding the credit card to keep the consumer culture humming. Friedan's book sent women to work in droves, and corporate America seized upon a golden opportunity to secure a cheaper workforce and offer countless products to use up their paychecks. Before long, the second family income was no longer an option. In the minds of many, it was a necessity. The whole book is based around the premise of the author finding a certain set of people that were living in a different way and doing homemaking in a kind of radical way, hence the name Radical Homemakers. But what I found from the book is that kind of radical is kind of in inverted commas because it's actually a really specific kind of person that answers her call. She is looking for someone really very specific, and I think that actually overall, homemaking can look so many different ways, and it's radical in England in itself. It's radical across the world in itself to be dependent on somebody else, to say no to a career, to say no to a history of women fighting for your ability to work, to say no to more money, to more things. That in itself is a radical act. You don't have to do it any more radically than that. And I think that's part of the thing that frustrated me the most about the book. So there's a whole sort of section in the middle that kind of got me grumpy, but the beginning and the end of the book are absolutely solid. And there's another quote that I'd like to read, and it says, "Home is where the great change will begin. It is not where it ends. Once we feel sufficiently proficient with our domestic skills, few of us will be content to simply practice them to the end of our days. Many of us will strive for more, to bring more beauty to the world, to bring about greater social change, to make life better for our neighbours, to contribute our creative powers to the building of a new, brighter, sustainable and happier future. That is precisely the great work we should all be tackling. If we start by focusing our energies on our domestic lives, we will do more than reduce our ecological impact and help create a living for all. We will craft a safe, nurturing place from which this great creative work can happen." Chapter 6 is absolutely where it's at in this book. It talks about including everyone in the economic picture. It talks about understanding what enough means. It talks about capitalizing on the resources you do have. It talks about minimizing your waste. It talks about spending money where it matters the most. It talks about being able to teach yourself new skills. It talks about thinking independently. It talks about working with the things you have. It talks about making mistakes, and it talks about having a fearless attitude towards life. There's so many really positive things in that last whole section. The thing that frustrated me so much was that it was really clear from the people that wrote back to her that a lot of them had a bit of a leg up in life. She does actually own up to that at the end of the book, that a lot of the people seemed to take what they had and kind of go with it, whether it was a load of money from a relative passing away, whether it was from savings from parents, whether it was that there happened to be a house on the land that their parents owned. Now, I don't really know huge amounts of people like that. I do know people that have had deposits paid on things for them by their parents, and or they've got money from relatives, but it's not very often you hear of in England that someone had so much land and that their children could live on it. It's not something that happens in this country very often, if not like at all, unless you are one of the extremely wealthy people. And thus therein I have just used the word and phrase wealthy people. What does wealth actually mean? That's probably where I want to end this podcast. Let's talk about what wealth actually means, because you can have a lot of money, sure, but does that actually mean that you're wealthy? Does it? I don't think money has got actually anything to do with wealth at all. I think that you can be wealthy by simply having relatives close by. You can be wealthy by having a garden full of homegrown produce. You can be wealthy in skills. You can be wealthy in a rich character. You can be wealthy by the friends and relationships you have. You can be wealthy by simply having a body that functions well and your health. You can be wealthy by having freedom. Not everyone around the country and world has freedom to do and make choices in the same way that you do. Part of my main things, I consider my main jobs as a homemaker, is to create wealth for our family. But I don't mean that in terms of a monetary kind of income. I don't need to have side hustles, and I don't need to create more money or create things for our family or bring in more things. I don't need desperately to go to the charity shop to find bargains to make us have more wealth in a way that the culture might see it. I want our family to be rich, but I want us to be rich in things like good health. I want us to be rich in love and joy and peace. I want us to be rich in books and music and art. I want us to be rich in skills and crafts. And I want us to be rich in relationships, truth, in wisdom. The thing is that our whole culture is basically going against that. It wants us to be rich in A stars. It wants us to be rich in quantities of houses we own. It wants us to be rich in how much money comes into our account and how many cars are on our drive and how many latest TV programs we've watched and how many different streaming things that we've got that we subscribe to. It's just a bonkers world that we live in, and it's kind of forgotten what's important, and it is jolly difficult to fight against that and be different. At the end of the day, in a culture that tells me that my whole life is about me and making sure I'm happy, to say no, actually my job and what I want to do in my life is to put my life aside, to set aside what I want and serve the people around me, is just so different. It's just so different, and it's difficult because you've literally got things telling you every day that you should have more And whether that's a better husband or a better house or better children, smarter children, more well-behaved children, or a fancier outfit or a nicer house or a nicer sofa, or all of these things, we're just absolutely bombarded. And while some things are good ideas and lovely inspiration, I feel like the more we can take ourselves away from those things, the better. But I actually think it would be almost impossible in 2023 to put yourself in a place where you don't see those things all the time. I often think about the simplicity of purchasing anything, even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. It was so much easier and less overwhelming than it is in 2023. So say I have got a duvet cover that has got some holes in the corner. I'm actually not quite sure how I've got holes in the corner of my duvet, but I do. I've got a few options. My main leading option, and is what I have done, is to mend it. But not everyone's going to think of that or have the capability of doing so. And some might think, well, it's on its way out, so why bother? But historically, I feel like 200 years ago, you would have mended it, because your alternative option was to purchase some new fabric at huge expense and create a new duvet cover. I mean, I don't think they had duvets anyway, but that's not the point. Let's just imagine that you're purchasing new fabric and it's a big deal because it's been shipped and created and handcrafted. It's a huge, huge deal. And let's even say 10 years ago, you might have, or 20 years ago, you would have gone down to your local store that sold home goods and you would have picked up what was available. You might have had a good 20 options in Dunelm Mill or your big Marks and Spencers or something like that, and you would have just chosen what was in front of you. Now, I can go on Instagram, I can type in duvet covers, I can be overwhelmed with all of the options for materials, for colours, for philosophies behind these things, for where they were made and how they were created. And I can buy it online or in store. I can buy it on Etsy. I can make it myself. The choices that we have now, the decisions we have to make are just so overwhelming. And I'm very, very grateful for that. In some ways, it's lovely to have all the information and the knowledge. But oh gosh, if I could go back in time and just have the simplicity of having so much less, I think the more that we can sort of force ourselves into that position, the better. Anyway, I'm not sure how I got into that little tangent, but yes, it's because we live in a major consumer culture and just we're forced to buy more. And the more that we earn, the more that we can spend, and the more that our government are happy with us. There are so many things I haven't talked about today. There are so many positive things about being a homemaker in the UK that I haven't spoken about. Things like the fact we have quite small homes that are easier to keep than bigger homes in other countries. We have everything's in walkable distance, pretty much. I can walk to so many things from here. I don't have to get in a car to go anywhere. We have free healthcare. We have great parental leave. There are so many benefits to living in our country, and I'm so grateful for where we live. The fact that we have really mild weather, we don't really have weather extremes. We're not afraid of tornadoes. We're not afraid of it being too hot for too long or too snowy for too long or anything like that. We've got very mild weather, and all we have to do is moan about the fact that it's grey a lot. We have wonderful things like old buildings and old castles and lots of old railway tracks to walk along and beautiful scenery. We have country shows, we're very good at queuing, and we don't really have any deadly animals. Like, we do have a few. I mean, you can get really sick from a tick bite, for example, or you can probably get killed by a very grumpy cow or a bull or something like that. But we don't have any, like, major things to be worried about or need to carry a gun for example. There are so many things that make life as a homemaker and life as just a human in England really rich and meaningful and lovely, and I just wish that we could all remember the positive over the negative more of the time. And I am most definitely preaching to myself there, as well as all of you out there. If you are a full-time homemaker or a mother, you know that your hands can get very, very busy, but your brain isn't always needed, and therefore can go down some crazy rabbit holes of negativity and or spiral on things that it needn't do. And so anyway, I just want to say that. Probably go and re-listen to my podcast a couple of podcasts ago called Stop Taking Everything So Seriously. Find time for some more fun. Okay, that was a heavy episode. I kind of want to apologise, but at least I've kind of got it out the way. I'm sure I shall ramble and rant about the politics of it all in the future. But for today, I'm going to leave that there. I hope that you found that helpful in some way, even if it's just feeling less alone in some of those thoughts, or maybe I inspired you in the very beginning to take cash out for your shop. I don't know. I hope there was something useful in there. I hope you have a brilliant rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining me, and check back soon for a new episode. Bye.